How did Albert Camus write novels? What was his axiomatic approach and mindset when he sat down at the desk to write? And I love Albert Camus, and that's why we have to cover him here on Right Conscious, where I covered the best books and authors of all time, especially courageous authors who didn't just write and live in their heads, but rather went into the world with their literature and changed it like Camus did. And so, hey, enough for me, everyone. Let's hear our first quote from Camus. A novel is never anything but a philosophy put into images, and in a good novel, the whole of the philosophy has passed into the images. And a second quote, people can think only in images. If you want to be a philosopher, write novels. And this is shocking information from Camus because I have been told by every other writing tuber and all the personal development writing books and in my MIC MFA factory program that I can write anything I want. It's about my authentic story and my voice. But Camus joins the ranks of many others I've talked about on this channel. Toni Morrison, Cormac McCarthy, David Foster Wallace, and so many others who believe that the purpose of the novel is to not just tell a story, but to transform individuals and thus making the world a better place. And this was the original purpose of story. Oral storytelling always had a moral. Fairy tales were not meant for children. They were meant for adults. And the children would stay up late and sneak around and listen. And maybe you think I'm drawing conclusions from those two quotes too fast. But then why would Camus say, the purpose of a writer is to keep civilization from destroying itself? That seems like an odd thing to say. Is the typical YA fantasy book keeping us from destroying ourselves? And if you aren't tapped into the consciousness, or I should say the collective consciousness of reality, and trying to change that in a positive way, then what are you doing here on Earth? I don't need to stoke anxiety about the Democrats or the Republicans, the left or the right, but unless you are a monk who's decided to remove yourself from society entirely, go off grid and not participate at all, then it's easy to see the decline, or I could even say the movement away from our highest potential, where we could be going. And now with thousands of nuclear bombs in the world and AI and every other scary thing coming on down the line, why wouldn't you focus your ability as an artist to help move individuals to a higher state of consciousness, to help them become better people? And in our little ivory towers where we get to write Bigfoot erotica and make money, and we get to be affirmed in our workshop classes, and you can't talk crap about any writer because we have to live with toxic positivity, I understand. But Camus, who had to deal with the Nazis, yes, the Nazis occupying his country, had a different point of view. But if you would have asked everyone who was living under any occupation, should we have prevented this during the good times when we were just sitting around? Shouldn't everyone who had an ability been doing something other than just trying to make as much money as they can so that they can retire early and chill as much as they can? Shouldn't the artists who are talented not be navel gazing and doing a circle jerk, but rather actually helping people? Every single person would have been like, yeah, I can't believe we weren't doing that. And another quote from Camus, fiction is the lie through which we tell the truth. And as artists, we have a much different conception of reality than the consensual reality. That's why we are artists. That's the whole thing. And if we don't put ourselves out there and actually get into the truth and the transformation game, we end up in a situation like we are in right now, where a bunch of dumb talking heads with no artistic ability on both sides of the political aisle, in the motivation sphere, in the personal development sphere, wherever, they take over. Being an artist means that you see the world differently and see truths from a way different perspective and can subvert them or elevate them. You can do whatever you want with them. And to be an artist, especially in this ever more complex reality, means that you will have opinions and ideas that are ludicrous, that are irrational, that the logic bros are going to say, what? He believes in that, and you will be decimated Because if you don't have your ducks lined up in the objective row and you're not sitting in a camp, then you are anti-hero enemy number one. But I want to speak to you right now and tell you that it is worth the effort, and we need more people doing this. Kanye West, this bipolar dude who is still at like level 1 of the conspiracy game and thinks that the Jews run everything. He's one of the only irrational artistic voices out there right now. Not who an artist who isn't scared to say what he thinks. But if you go back 100 years, 80 years, there were countless artists saying what they thought. Everybody was. There were communists and fascists and super religious people and atheists. It was wild. Now we are just hollow shells of that. And so it's going to take courage, because doing this, speaking the truth, means that you may get some pushback. It means that you may lose your job. It means that your life may become harder for a while or for the rest of your life. But people like Camus risked his life during World War II to push what he believed in. And on April 26th at 9 a.m., I'm going to be hosting a book club on The Stranger titled The Stranger for Writers Book Club. And we're going to be talking about how the stranger functions as a machine of desire, and looking at things like language overlay and image patterning and other stuff in the stranger. And that will be accompanied by a full-length course video on what Camus did to make the stranger canonical in terms of writing. And so if you guys want to join my Right Conscious Book Club, get access to my courses, my writing, and a ton of other stuff, you can find all that on Substack.com, which is the home of the literary renaissance. The best writers are on Substack. The best readers are on Substack. And so if you are not on there, I will put the link down in the description below. I have dozens of hours of free content on my Substack also. And over there, I am not censored, and I basically do deeper dives than I do here on YouTube. And so I would love to see you guys over there. And now let's get back into it. And so I just mentioned image patterning, and that's kind of one of the significant tricks, if I could call it, that Camus employs in many of his novels, because when you have more muted interiority and the plot of your novels is somewhat lackluster, then what do? How do you make a novel work? And Camus is much like Cormac McCarthy, whose novels have little to no characterization, no interiority, sometimes no plot or little to no plot, but are amazing. And both authors succeed in doing this through their image patterning. And so, for instance, in The Stranger, and I won't spoil anything here, Camus employs the sun endlessly. Much like Cormac McCarthy in Outer Dark and Mishima and countless other authors, the sun, solar energy, is obviously the classic symbol. But Camus primes the sun through patterning to equal oppressive meaninglessness, absurdity, and his other kind of core philosophical ideals. However, if you just gave The Stranger to a random person, they maybe wouldn't be noticing that. But unconsciously, they are processing it. And so something that many novelists don't realize is that images and image patterning is the core of every single good novel. I am also doing a book club on Hamlet and King Lear and Oedipus Rex. And we're talking about the main theme of that call is examining vision, sight, and how that's patterned throughout the plays until the penultimate moment of blindness manifests. And so transformative authors and really good authors don't just write a story. They write a story and get the first draft down, then spend 95% of their time sneaking in images that are connected to these philosophical ideals. Being a good novelist is like being an occultist. You're like hiding all these hermetic codes within your work. Because we've all read novels before or short stories that are preachy, and it sucks. None of us like to get preached to. Even philosophies I agree with, I hate to be preached at in pieces of art. And so I will also include a link to a free post and free video I made over on my Substack where I dive really deep into image patterning, because that requires a whole other video. But just in terms of literary history, it's interesting that Camus was doing this because the poets of his era were also doing this, because modernism had this fixation on the image. Like William Carlos Williams said, there are no ideas but in things. Repeat after me, no ideas but in things. And that fixation on the inanimate object and dialing in on that eventually faded out. And the obvious evolution of that wasn't the rejection of it with postmodernism and where we're at now, but rather the elevation of that, and by infusing spirituality, mythology, philosophy, and, or whatever else into these images. And so if this is what the Chinese poets and the Japanese poets had been doing for a millennia. But as novelists, people like Camus, Cormac McCarthy, Faulkner's, and others, for basically the first time in history, they had this ability because of modernism to see clearly for the first time as authors, as a society, but then be able to add across a long form novel deeper layers of philosophical complexity and not have to necessarily rant like Tolstoy in War and Peace, which is a great novel. But if Tolstoy had the tools that writers had in the 1940s and 50s, his work would look much different, much more muted, much more hermetic. And so there it is, everybody. That is how Camus wrote novels. That's how he approached them. He was trying to tell the reader something. He was trying to make people better, make them contemplate their existence. And so thank you guys for being here. If you guys want, you can come join the book club. And if not, I will see you guys in the next video.